Hello and welcome back to the Go Karts and Good Times YouTube channel. I have good news and a huge progress update. If you saw my last video, you'll know that I was having some problems when reassembling my EJ25 that's supposed to go in my Impreza. This car's been down for the count for a couple of months, and we're finally getting near the point where the engine's complete and ready to go in. Our problem last time is that we were getting interference between the top of the piston and the bottom of the head, which we thought at first was because of incorrect pistons, but was actually because we used a rod that was too long. I'm not going to get into it in depth here, but it turns out the 2004 and 2007 EJ25 engines are way more different than I had originally supposed. As I said in the last video, I was going to get the engine back assembled to where it was good to go and at the same stage in the process as the video ended. And here we finally are. I ordered a new rod to replace the chewed up one that came out of my blown up engine and put the set 2007 rods in, so now it turns over freely and has all the right components in it. As you can see, I also have all the timing pulleys and the cam gears on the front of the engine, and now I can put on that timing belt and get it in time. Of course, I picked up a new belt, and now I just have to look up the procedure for getting this thing timed correctly. As it turns out, the timing process is easier than expected, with marks on the cam gears that are supposed to go upward. Again, a mark here and a mark here that both go upward, and marks on the timing belt that correspond with them. With a lot of engines, you just put cylinder 1 at top dead center and then go from there, but because of the nature of the boxer, the pistons have to be lined up by the mark on the crank, and they're at an in-between position so that you can freely rotate the cam and the valves won't touch the pistons. I didn't exactly film the process because it was more annoying than expected and a lot easier to just get it done, all hands on deck. But as you can see here, the timing mark and the mark on the belt, everywhere there is one, are lined up perfectly. And after turning the engine over a few times, you can verify that they continue to line up through rotations of both the cam gears and the crankshaft.
Once, and then you come around to a second time, and we should see. Where's the mark? Through the triangle.
Because we had to rebuild the engine a second time, we kind of had a second chance to clean things up or order additional parts, which is what we did here by getting new hardware and a new front timing cover because the other one really wasn't in great shape and the bolts holding it on were disgusting, if you recall. With the main cover on, I can now slip on the smaller one, which slides right over and into place. With the front covers on, I'm also going to elect to put on small things like the oil filler neck and the dipstick tube that won't actually get in the way when installing the engine and may just be easier to do now. Like I mentioned in the last video, the dipstick tube kind of needed a coat of paint, so I gave it one, and just like everything else, this gets new O-rings as well as the oil filler tube. With this secondary coolant passage on and both of the oil related things on, I can now do something I haven't done in quite a long time. Another small thing we have to install before we can consider this done is a couple of sensors on each of the heads that relate to the function of the VVT. Then finally, we can get the front pulley, harmonic balancer, whatever you want to call it, on to complete the front of the engine. The last piece of the puzzle before we get the engine on the cherry picker are putting the engine mounts back on. With the engine mounts installed on both sides, the engine is now basically complete and ready to go on to the cherry picker. With our chain on and everything in place, we can start getting this thing lifted up before we can slide it off of the stand. With the engine on the cherry picker, we can finally move on to getting our brand new flywheel and clutch installed. I did opt to go with a more budget-minded eBay option, but I didn't go for the cheapest one, and again tried to aim for something kind of in the middle. Of course, if I wanted the guarantee of no issues, I should have bought an Exetti, but this should still be fine for me. Of course, with the new flywheel, we also got a brand new Subaru pilot bearing. Of course, we're also going to get both of the clutch surfaces cleaned up before we get them installed. Like I mentioned earlier and in the last video, I wanted to keep this one a little bit more brief, so I'm going to skip showing the process of getting it all torqued down and update you when we're done. Now we get to use the handy dandy clutch alignment tool to get the actual clutch disc in place. And finally, the pressure plate can go on to finish this clutch sandwich. Again, I'm going to skip the process of getting all these bolts torqued down and let you know when we get done with that. And finally, with the clutch on, the moment I've been waiting for, removing the alignment tool. We still have to do the transmission side with a new throwout bearing and all the associated hardware, and the engine bay leaves a lot to be desired. So before putting the engine in, there's a lot of cleaning to get done on the car and in the workspace. It's dark, but like I mentioned before, I did want to get the car outside so I could pressure wash it. Today is the only 50-degree day of this week, so it's a great time to do it. And while I already have degreaser sprayed on the subframe and other parts of the engine bay, you can tell there's pretty grimy. And there's plenty of dirt and other just random crap built up in all the areas of the engine bay. It's dark, so you might not be able to see it as well, but there should be a pretty big difference between how it is now and how it'll look when I'm done. I apologize for the quality of the last clip, but here I am the next day with an update. I did film it after last night, but it was too dark to see anything, so here I am. As you can see, the engine bay is significantly cleaner, and while it's still not perfect, at least all the major debris and dirt are cleared off, and there's no caked up grime and grease on the subframe like there used to be. A lot of this can be attributed to this torn CV boot, which I will have to eventually replace, but it's not making any noise, so I'm trying to get as much life as possible out of it. I'd ideally want to do that, and the wheel bearing I suspect is going bad before the car's back on the road, but those are things that can be dealt with later. This is already too much talking for my liking, so I'm going to try and keep it short, but as you can also see, the garage is nice and cleaned up, so we can move on to the next stage. You may also notice all the rust that's in the engine bay and propping up on other parts of the car. It isn't major, most of it is surface rust, but it is going to be dealt with. Before I go ahead putting the engine in, I'm going to use rust converter and undercoating to treat areas like the engine bay and these pinch welds, which are beat up and starting to rust, where the paint has been chipped off or they've been bent over and separated. You should know by now things like this will have to be dealt with in a completely separate time, but I can again reapply rust preventative coating to slow down the spread. This is yet another boring process, so I'm going to do 99% of the work off camera and update you when I get things cleaned up and start laying down different layers of coating. After a quick stop to the part store, we have some supplies like this rust barrier coating that we're going to use to treat some of the surface rust on the frame and other parts of the car, and coolant, which we'll need when we go to reassemble the engine and put it in the car. Fortunately, I had 6 quarts of this cheap stuff that I bought while the car was burning oil that I've only used 1 quart of, so I have enough oil to put in the engine for the break-in period. As long as it's the correct weight, it should be fine because it's just getting changed out in a few hundred miles anyway. With all the surfaces prepped that are going to be receiving paint, I'm going to start putting it down over areas with surface rust or where the paint has chipped off. Glopping on paint isn't exactly a hard process or an interesting one, so I'll update you when I get the first round done. While I did create a bit of a mess, you can at least see that the subframe and all other areas that either were already painted black or won't be seen got that brush on rust preventative coating. All other areas got the spray on stuff that is clear unless it hits rust. So in these areas that are painted gray and have rusty brackets or little tiny rust spots peeking through, it'll mostly still look gray, but all the spots where the rust will turn black, so it'll look more normal than painting on some big heavy coating. On the pinch welds or any other areas that had rust creeping through, I again use that spray coating that stays clear until it turns black when it contacts rust. This will look nicer and at least slow down the rust a little bit as opposed to doing nothing or using that brush on black coating. This process will have to be completed with successive coatings until I feel comfortable with the amount of rust or bare metal that is covered. After another round of searching for rust or bare metal, I think between the paint on stuff and the spray, I have a very complete coverage of all of the areas I wanted to hit, or at least the best I can do as everything sits without further disassembling the car. Like I've mentioned a fair number of times, rust is an extremely large problem where I live up in the Northeast. And this means that it doesn't matter how well you coat a metal part, if rust is started, it will spread unless you completely eradicate it. And even when it comes to coating brand new things, like cars from the factory with undercoating or rust preventative coatings, they will rust eventually, and all of it is just biding the time until it eventually does damage to your metal. I'm not saying it's impossible to have a rust-free car in the Northeast, but it's extremely hard unless you garage keep it in the winters or just don't drive it. And when it comes to my car, getting it rusty and it being a beat-up daily driver to begin with, I'm not really concerned, and what I've done is way better than if I just ignored the problem and said, oh well, rust is going to take the car eventually anyway. At least I'm slowing it down. And that brings us to the final task before I end this video and get the engine inside the car. These parts are either part of the accessory drive or other brackets that need to go on when installing the engine, and as you can see, they have a little bit of rust and they don't look the best. You've seen enough painting and cleaning, so just expect that between this video and the engine installation video, I will get these cleaned up and painted. And if you actually watch the videos in order, this will explain what were crusty parts suddenly looking half decent. Hopefully this served as a good update, and in between the original engine assembly video and actually getting the engine in the car as we dealt with the problems we encountered along the way. And that brings us to now where I want to end this video. I do have a catch can and some small filters coming in the mail because even though it's not as big of an issue on the non-turbo engines, it still is a problem, and I want to be able to monitor the amount of oil that's being consumed through the case event. As it sits now, I have everything prepared, painted up, and ready to go as far as getting the engine in, so that should be a fairly quick, simple video that just follows the reverse process of the first video of pulling the engine out. For the most part, I'm happy with where things are now, and if you made it this far in the video, I want to thank you for watching. If you enjoyed, I'd appreciate it if you liked, comment, or subscribe to the channel, and hopefully you're excited for when I actually get the engine into the car. For now, this is me signing off.